It's easy to write off a low-scoring game. Whilst a 38-36 chuckabout is fun, once we reach finals day, little is as gripping as the kind of match where only 2 tackles have been missed and whoever slips off the third is going to lose their team the game and hence the entire title. After Six Nations, where tries were abundant but tension absent, Saturday's decider between the Red Roses and the 15 de Feminine offered up some real occasion to go with the quality we've been seeing all Six Nations. The game was 0-0 at 40 minutes and yet somehow seemed to only get tighter as it went on beyond that. England eventually battling to a 10-6 scoreline and with it a third successive title. So, how did they overcome the French threat and secure the Six Nations? And things began just as the two teams' two tight 2020 encounters ended, with Emily Scarrett stealing it. France are set up to receive the kickoff like so, but Rollins aims it for the space here, look at this, and check the French body positioning. All are shaping to take a ball in front of them, and if this kick went a yard further back, Boujard would sprint in from the backfield to take it, but Rollins' kick is superbly placed and hits a tiny pocket of dead space where any defender would need to catch it going backwards. They need to turn round, with the one and only Ms. Scarrett lined up perfectly where the kick is headed. Hermé has the turn, and best case scenario, she's still being smashed in the open target that's become her back, but Scarrett smuggles away in between, past, and instead strips the ball, taking advantage of how far from Hermé's body she's catching it, with the French captain anticipating Rose Bernadou coming into support, meaning she's expecting to hand it on anyway. Instead, she hands it on to Scarrett, and this gives England the ball, and they play phases to try and draw France in. Eventually, they do. The French see a perfect chance to blast the ruck here and really disrupt the England ball and slow the attack. England only retaining it because the ball is so repulsed by this really ugly ruck that it splurges out of its own record. Cleo regathers calmly, but France flood numbers around, this breakdown sniffing a second turnover chance in a row. However, numbers are taken out of the game, and this means a quick phase through Old Croft not only regains momentum, but leaves the entire French pack on the inside of Rollins in this space here, giving the backs outsider a 4-on-3. This is a superb hard line by McKenna, who just tucks an arm around Mayans to slow her down slightly and essentially turn Harrison v Hermé into a 2-on-1, which she executes to unleash Scarrett. Now normally, Scarrett draws Boujard and Breach finishes in the corner, but let's just take a second to check the work of French 10 Caroline Drouin. This is her on the far wing, but spotting how England are aligned, sprints the whole width of the pitch to hurl herself at Scarrett's ankles, as so few of us are worthy of doing, and you can see a wonderful but very brief moment of, oh shit, on Scarrett's face as she realises she's about to hit the turf instead of creating a first-minute try. And it allows Boujard to get over the ball and turn it over, with Breach in position for the pass instead of there for the clear-out. Then, somewhat perfectly, France do exactly the same thing in response. Bernadou crashes it up to trap the England forwards in this zone here, meaning quick ball allows Mayans to hit a similar line to McKenna's on her to put Ulatule outside Harrison, who can then give Cyril Bonnet, one of the most dangerous players on the planet, a run down the wing. This opening passage kind of summed up the entire game. Fast, frantic, both teams breaking each other down, yet no point actually being scored thanks to a brilliant scramble and some good breakdown work. And those two defences remained points of fascination throughout the 80 minutes. England play a far more standard into-out blitz, looking to pressure France and push them out to the outskirts, leading to panicky passes like these and taking options, ideas and space away from France with every half second until eventually they're trapped with nothing to do but take the tackle. After a breakaway by foul off turnover ball, France have an overlap and try to spread it wide. Lagi Tuamana is still scrambling to get back into position, but Zoe Harrison does phenomenally well. Just watch her here. She buys so much time. France get outside the forwards easily, but Harrison sprints up, then checks, drifts, and allows Tuima and Dow to cover Bonnet. Bonnet steps, but Harrison makes the tackle herself, and France have lost 4 metres on what should have been a clear overlap, all thanks to Zoe Harrison and England's outward blitz. Because the defence presses from the middle of the field outwards to the touchline, the wings tend to defend unusually narrow and then drift out once the ball is in play. We saw France try to manipulate this by sending a crash ball to just inside Breach or Dow's channel, the idea being they get drawn in tight to the ruck and leave space wide on the actual wing. Drouin here tries to do exactly that, and the next phase they manage to breach Breach's wing, Boujard wiggling past her. But perhaps the most fun example is right here. France hit that space twice in a row, and the second time Ménager slips through and offloads to Chauchat, but the England cover gets it easily enough, it's no real problem. But spotting France have relocated heavily on the short side. Breach stands wider than usual, but this leaves Harrison with more ground than she'd expect to cover, and Drouin can target her and take her out the game with a lovely offload to Bernardo, who then does exactly the same thing to Bouchard. Sarah McKenna's fullbacking here is pretty phenomenal. She shoots in so she doesn't have the time to spot Sanzousis on her inside, but the scrum half adapts and keeps the move alive. After a few phases in the 22, Nyssen fumbles into that kind of inside the outside channel, hits exactly that space they're aiming at. Benet comes in to play 9 to keep the pace up, and Dow makes the same positioning gamble Breach did moments earlier, standing wider than she normally would, and it creates some space that would have led to the first try of the game if only this pass by Ménager didn't drift forward. The French defence, however, is almost completely the opposite, a weird twist on the modern blitz. The idea is wingers hold their width at all times, almost never biting in or shooting up with the main line. The players inside them instead applying pressure. There's no way you can get outside this French team. If you're breaking them down, it's through the middle. It's a bit like the two women on the far extremes turn the pitch from a field into a tunnel. There's only one way through it, and it's on the other 13 French ladies to stand in the way and try to make sure England don't get to the light at the end of that tunnel. Here, Mayans is the sole player applying pressure, with the dual Carolines just standing their ground outside instead of sprinting up. Some defenders are jogging straight whilst others sprinting diagonally, and managing a defence where players are only sometimes heading in the same direction requires a great level of communication and cohesion, but thankfully France have a lady to set their defence by. Now, Safi Ndiaye has been one of the best forwards in the world for nearing on a decade at this point, and only becomes more and more important to them as her cap count ticks up. And so, whenever France is defending, keep an eye on Ndiaye. How Ndiaye defends is almost always how France defend that phase. If Ndiaye positions herself near the ruck and pushes softly, France drift and push softly. If Ndiaye lines herself up opposite the first receiver, France act far more aggressive. Here, she rushes up and eats a second of O'Donnell's time and allows second row partner Fowl to smash the support. Here, she leads a heavy blitz on Rowlands. I couldn't tell you if the rest of the team are just following her lead in these examples, or if she's just such a key cog nailing her role every single time, but either way, she's good as the secret to France's efficiency in defence, as they contained an attack that has torn apart basically everyone they've played for several years, including France themselves. And so, if England are going to get it going, they need to deal with not just Ndiaye, but cause the French as much confusion about how they're defending that tunnel as possible. Off this scrum, England call a two-phase move to ultimately culminate in the trademark Scarrett switch. Riley positions herself to get as much in Sanzousis and her mate's way as possible, and Cleal plays a flat ball to the ever-dangerous Jess Breach. She just drifts, holds the defence a bit before popping it to Harrison only once Cleal is in position to clear out and grant quick ball. But Cleal does something more than clear out. She rolls just an extra yard right into the path of Fowl and Ndiaye, arms outstretched to just increase the distance the pair have to run to get past her, around her, and into this space here, where they'd want to be defending the tunnel. Rowlands jogs sideways, Ménager has no choice but to follow, and Scarrett can explode back into that space faster than the 2 second rows can get across, Packer anticipating and taking the offload. The two locks do get back and make the tackles, but this manipulation has granted England a momentum they then won't let up, and eventually leads to what should have been the first points of the game. But for this, Emily Scarrett somehow missing this absolute running for the post, guaranteed 3 points, absolute sit. It's like watching Michael Jordan fail to chuck a basketball into the sea from aboard a boat. I don't know how it happened, but it did. Weird. But those first points did eventually come as the monumental Poppy Cleal saw us into half-time with the only try of the game. Given a free kick at the scrum, Cleo doesn't take it immediately, and that catches France slightly off guard. She's too slow to be playing it quick, but she's also too quick to be doing anything else, so it must be... Oh no, Maines is the only player who gets out of there in time. She's then one of 4 French players to commit themselves to Cleo, all drawn in before she can free an arm and offload to Harrison. Free then make the tackle on her, leaving 6 defenders on the floor. A great clear out by Rowlands and Allcroft pin 3 of those to the floor and ties Hermé to the ruck. But the 4 last effort didn't get Cleo to ground, allowing her a really clean route to the ruck and then to pick and go and sneak under Socha, who's only just got back to the line and has to try and stop her on her own. Poppy Cleal is Poppy Cleal, so obviously she scores. This is going to sound like hella faint praise, but the most impressive thing about the Red Roses is that they're a team. Despite a squad containing so many of the world's best players, Simon Middleton's side never relies on individuals. The likes of Scarrett and Breach can have quiet games, or Cleo can get put on the backside like this, like so. And it doesn't affect the plan, the team one bit. They're such a united, well put together side, always thinking of what comes next instead of whatever the player with the ball is doing in that moment. This was invaluable when a tight second half rolled around, the team understanding how to win when not scoring the endless tries they have throughout the rest of this Six Nations. France, on the other hand, are more like a collection of great attributes knitted together by whichever world-class scrum half they happen to have on the pitch at that time, and as such, some of their decision-making is sometimes lacking. Laure Saint-Just puts in this superb kick in the 4th minute, but it was about the only one France made to apply pressure rather than to relieve it for most of the match, despite it being such a cagey, tunnely game. France were on top in the scrum, again for most of the game, yet failed to use it to manufacture a single point or even a real opportunity, and the backs looked sharp, especially once Pauline Baudot during proceedings, but they only really managed to create one opportunity across 80 minutes, denied by that forward pass. And then we have the more direct decisions. The pitch was more blustery than everyone suggesting Sam Simmons might go on a Lions tour put together, and yet France followed up this kind of forward domination by opting to let their third best place kicker try to slot a tricky one with the wind blowing this way across the face of the post. It's really difficult to judge from this kind of angle. Drouin overcompensates for the wind and hits the near post. We then saw England have a very similar decision at the opposite end right at the end of the game, and Sarah Hunter opts for the corner on a kickable penalty to run down the clock. This was a game that felt like it had very few scores in it, and even in a worst case scenario, from a French perspective, you almost felt it would be easier to manufacture a try post kickoff from inside the English half than to try and find a free pointer from on your own try line post line out. Then, when that doesn't happen, once Holly Davidson sticks her arm out again, England smartly and patiently squeeze as much time out of the advantage as they possibly can. We saw the Cardiff Blues a month or so ago fail to do this against Sex Best Paddy's band of cunts, taking a drop goal when they could have just eaten up the clock first so the opposition wouldn't get time to kick off again, which they ultimately did and won the game. England just needed to secure the kick-off after this and survive 10 seconds to take the game, which they did. This was the third tense, tight encounter between France and England in 18 months, and it's the third time France have lost narrowly late on. And at some point, you have to start asking why they haven't won one of those games when they've been 100% good enough to win all of them. They have a real habit of making errors right as they're building momentum, such as this kick out on the full right after the first points of the game, and whereas they get away with this against 4 of the other 5 nations in this tournament, England are superb at making them pay for it. Following their best spell of the game up to that point, France gift England a free kick here, and in response the Red Roses attack not with verve, pace or invention, but with patience. Obviously scoring would be nice, it's the point of the game, but that's not all that's at stakes here. The game is metaphorically in France's grip at that moment, and every time England make a little half-yard game line bust or force the French to take a step backwards in defence, it loosens one finger's purchase on the match ever so slightly until eventually things start to feel even. It's the kind of passage where just the act of attacking is as important as the actual scoring would have been. But when France did have a proper chance to break through with about 10 minutes to go, they stripped the game back to just safety first, abandoning their previous 1-3-3-1 structure to just individual blocks of 3, all good as pre-binding to try and drive teammates over the line. It's an incredibly low-risk strategy, but it's also so predictable to defend that it actually backfires on them. This allows England to get one great shot on them and almost force France into touch, and in the next phase is so telegraphed, especially with Baudon barking and calling for it, that Hunter can assume a teammate will make the tackle on foul and targets the ball instead. She strips it and Rowlands can make a great clearance. France played rugby so safety conscious in this moment, it came out the other end and became more dangerous than just reverting to their usual more adventurous, risky patterns. Because this French team are so close to being something really special, and pondering what it is that they're missing makes it actually quite easy to miss just how good this Red Roses team currently actually already are. This is a team who have just secured a third Six Nations and now have a year to try and get even better still before the World Cup, because they do still have lots of room to improve. The attack and defence are good as there, but the composure, kicking game and set piece do still need a bit of work before they take on New Zealand next year. The Red Roses travel to France this Friday night for a friendly, with both sides missing players dual registered with the Sevens programme, which would make for a perfect opportunity for England to try and develop a more conservative kicking-based game ahead of the World Cup that seems to be just perpetually 1 year away at any given time. Whilst for France, this is their chance to win. They've got to try and scrape one up here. It doesn't matter how many points are scored on Saturday or Friday night, or how many times they play. The Red Roses versus Le 15 de Feminine has become one of the most consistent, dynamic and thrilling regular fixtures in World Rugby. Occasion, gender, tier, level, whatever aside, it doesn't even matter whether it's a game where both teams are scoring 6 tries or one where they miss 6 tackles between them. It's a fixture you can never write off.